At When We're Not Hustling, we believe that seeing sex workers as full people outside of our work is an essential step towards humanizing and destigmatizing the industry and those who work within it. Help us to bring you the stories of the people behind the fantasies. When We're Not Hustling is a 501c3 fiscally sponsored nonprofit project of the Social Good Fund. Thank you for considering a tax-deductible recurring contribution. All contributions will be received through our fiscal sponsor, the Social Good Fund. You can contribute at nothustling.com. Thank you so much.
Put away the lingerie. I want to know you. Tell me more. I don't care about the news. I'd rather hear about you and see the world from your point of view. The coffee's already made, so I probably should just pull up a chair and tell me more.
Welcome to When We're Not Hustling, a podcast where sex workers talk about everything but. I'm your host, Jessie Sage. When We're Not Hustling is a weekly podcast that explores the lives and identities of sex workers outside of our work personas, our personal philosophies, ambitions, families, relationships, passions, spirituality, and so much more. We talk about our lives beyond the job, asking, what does the flexibility of sex work allow us to do, and who does it allow us to be? On this show, we learn who sex workers are outside of the work we're known for. When We're Not Hustling is an exploration of the people behind the fantasies. When We're Not Hustling is powered by Black Venom Digital. Black Venom Digital is a collaboration between myself and industry veteran Mr. Black Venom. Black Venom Digital aims to provide adult professionals and entrepreneurs with professional-grade web design, graphic design, and branding services that will inspire growth and success. At Black Venom Digital, we empower companions, creators, and entertainers with professional web design and branding. If you're looking for a new website or any other branding services and you work in the adult industry, please find out more at blackvenomdigital.com. Welcome back to another episode of When We're Not Hustling. This is the last regular episode of the season, which means it's also the last regular episode of the year. We have done an entire year of this show, and it has been such an honor and such a pleasure to hold all of these stories of all these amazing people who have shared their lives with us. So we are so grateful. Today we're going to be talking to Mistress Olivia Snow about a wide range of topics that include academia, Herman Melville, alienated labor, the hierarchy, and so much more. But before we get into that, at the close of season 2, I want to thank all of you who've listened, who've come on, who've supported this show, and who've supported the show this year. We are so grateful to all of you and have had so much fun. Next week, we are going to have the last episode. This is the last normal episode, but next week we're going to have the last episode altogether of the show for the season. It's going to be a roundtable like we did last season, but this one is going to be about the mind, and we're going to have some of the writers that have come on the show on to talk to us about living a creative and intellectual life. So that should be really great. Before we get into the episode for today, though, I want to give a quick introduction to Olivia Snow. Dr. Olivia Snow is a writer, professor, and dominatrix based in New York City. She's currently a visiting assistant researcher at the University of California, Los Angeles' Department of Gender Studies and the Center for Critical Internet Inquiry, where she studies sex work, labor rights, tech, and policy. She's written for Wired, The Daily Beast, Jezebel, The Chronicle of Higher Education, The Nation, Slate, and Motherboard Vice. And she's been quoted in stories on sex work and whorephobia for Business Insider, BuzzFeed, CNN, The Daily Dot, Fast Company, Forbes, Glamour, The Guardian, Inside Higher Ed, Mashable, Mel Magazine, The New York Post, Paper Magazine, Polygon, Prism, TechCrunch, The Washington Post, and more. So certainly out and about in sex work circles. So we can go ahead and turn right to our episode. Hello, Snow. It's good to see you today.
Good to see you too, Jessie.
Yeah, we have done this before. I'm excited. Can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Well, my name is Olivia Snow. I am a dominatrix based in New York City and a researcher in the Department of Gender Studies at UCLA.
So are you like a remote researcher? Like, how does that
Yeah. Well, okay. So my research now.
LA are not close to each other.
No, I also I fucking hate LA. Like, I try to spend as little time as possible. What I research now is algorithmic surveillance of in-person sex workers. Like, there's a lot of info on like content creators, but like what I research is how like our how we get profiled by like particularly our phones as sex workers and what that means and how it spreads.
Can we talk about that for a few minutes?
Yeah, sure.
So this isn't a show about sex work, but I think this is important. And also, like, I think that it is your research, which is outside of doing sex work. So I'm curious, like, I think that's really important because I do see most of the emphasis being put on like online content creators. But I also know, because I live in Pittsburgh, which is like a hotbed of like technology and AI and Carnegie Mellon University and policing, and that so that there is so much surveillance that goes into in-person sex workers that people don't even recognize or think about. For example, like face scraping of ads and things like that. So
yeah,
can you talk a little bit about like what you found in your research?
Yeah, well, okay, so this has been happening way longer than I think anyone truly realizes, anyone other than like sex workers in their 50s and older. But even like in the early 2000s, sex workers were reporting that PayPal was shutting them down, and there was no real reason to think PayPal would know. Mm-hmm. Sex workers like in the 90s were getting their bank accounts shut down. And the way that algorithms work, or at least machine learning algorithms, is that even like they're designed to teach themselves to be better algorithms. So even the engineers who code them don't know how they're going to end up working. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's just like part of how they work. So like the best hypothesis for how we get sniffed out is like depositing certain amounts or like certain bills in certain ATMs in certain neighborhoods at certain times of night. And once, a pattern gets recognized, then that gets exploited and then, used on other populations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in Pittsburgh, many years ago, when I was doing more local organizing, one of the things that happened is, and I've talked about this on Peep Show, but I don't think I've ever talked about it here, is that there was a hackathon at the university between University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon. And the idea of the hackathon was to like give undergraduate students a place to come up with like interesting and creative things that they could.
Jesus.
The keynote speaker of this hackathon was the CEO of Marinus Analytic. And Marinus Analytic is a spin-off company that came out of Carnegie Mellon, somebody's basic like doctoral research program that became a company. And what that company did was not perfect, but like really hone it in on facial recognition software that they got all of the data. The way that they got all the facial recognition data is by scraping escort ads. And then what they did was they lined up very intentionally lined up all the social media profiles of like the real name social media profiles of the sex workers with these escort ads, and then sold that information to the police as an anti-trafficking effort. And so, yeah. So mm-hmm. SWAP, the Sex Worker Outreach Project in Pittsburgh, disrupted this like hackathon, which was amazing. A very brave person raised their hand and asked like what was going to happen with the sex workers. And then people opened red umbrellas and like walked out of the event.
Nice.
It was like
cool as hell.
Yeah. I still have some of the like red umbrellas as a, as a memory of that event. Uh, but I mean, it pointed to what was happening, which is that like everybody thought it was okay, so much so that these like institutions, these huge universities were like, let's bring the person that's selling pictures of sex workers to the police in as an example of what all these students can
Amazing things.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was wild, and people like didn't recognize that that was something that was going on and why that would be problematic.
Yeah. God, what year was that?
Had to be like 19 somewhere. It was before the pandemic.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. My last article was I talked to some sex workers who had gotten stopped at the border.
I saw that.
Yeah. And that's been happening at least to the like women I talked to since like 2013. Yeah. But I mean, even before then, right, we had like hotels would print out ads and put that shit behind the desk to like clock sex workers when we walked in. Like manually. Yeah. So this has been going on like way longer than like algorithms have existed, but that's made it so much worse.
Right. I'm sure hotels know who is working at the hotels.
They have to.
Yeah.
Right.
I would think so.
Like, right. Yeah. No, it's horrifying. Or like, so I was coming home, I think from Dublin last year, and I get to JFK and I'm walking up to the Border Patrol agent and he goes, "Hello, Olivia," because I know, because whatever like facial recognition shit they had going on in the like immigration line just pointed me out. And he hadn't seen my passport yet. He like didn't see my ticket. They just told him my name. Like
But you're not face out. Where did they get your face?
Oh, I mean, it was my government name.
Oh, okay.
But still.
Specifically said Olivia.
Well, yeah, what was I gonna? Yeah, I mean, I have started going face out ever since I got doxxed, but
yeah. I mean, all of that is really interesting. So I'm glad that you're doing. It's not interesting in like a horrifying sort of way.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you're doing that kind of work. But before you did that, like you were doing totally different sort of research. What were you doing before then?
Yes. So before that, I got my PhD in American literature, and I was a Herman Melville scholar. Yeah, that's why I have like 1,000 copies of Moby Dick behind me.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I have Moby Dick written all in emojis. I have Moby Dick in French.
So what made you attracted to Moby Dick and Herman Melville?
Well, I mean, have you read it? The guy's fucking hilarious. Like, he's just like a funny writer. Pardon?
I haven't read it. I feel like...
Well, I have an extra copy or 5 if you
That's something I should read in my life. But
or like Bartleby the Scrivener is his like famous short story. He's fucking hilarious, and the way he writes about like capitalism is just like it really resonates. 200 some years later. So when I started grad school, like fucking almost 15 years ago, I was kind of confused or like about like American national identity. Not really confused, but like fascinated by it. Like, so my parents are immigrants. And my mom, who is, God, I hope she's not fucking listening to this, but
does she follow your stuff?
Well, I got doxxed to her.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. We haven't spoken in a couple of years since then. Anyway, her favorite book is Moby Dick, which is weird because she's not the most intellectual of people. Okay. I will put generously because she'll be so mad. So her favorite book is Moby Dick, and like she would perform Americanness in like really peculiar ways that I like didn't really quite get. Like, she's super into American football, and I'm like, you didn't even know what this shit was until like. And she like developed like a pretty strong Yinzer accent, which is like, but
which for people who are listening outside of Pittsburgh is a very specific Pittsburgh accent.
It's like hyper specific. So I wanted to like try to research like what it was about like certain aspects of American culture like make people like this, like it just, and it ended up kind of turning into well, my dissertation ended up being on the dehumanization of the laboring body. And in like some 19th century texts. And of course, I was like, I won't talk about gender, and that way no one will know I'm secretly a sex worker. And I'm like, really? Dehumanization of the laboring body? You fucking idiot. Like
freaking theme, but okay.
Yeah. But I was talking about like manual labor and shit. Like, but my one
work that we do.
Yeah. Well, I'm like, really, you thought you were slick, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A big portion of that was how like early writers and like explorers and colonizers would dehumanize bodies of indigenous people when they got to the Caribbean and the States. So like Washington Irving did a lot of this shit. Nathaniel Hawthorne I looked at too. And one of the main ways that Columbus specifically would dehumanize the Caribs was by accusing them of cannibalism.
Interesting.
And that was kind of the like trick he used to get Queen Isabella to agree to have him traffic these people across the ocean under the guise of converting them from cannibalism to Catholicism.
Did he, which Catholicism feels like the most cannibalistic religion. Like,
right? Like you're drinking blood.
But okay.
Eating flesh. Like what the fuck?
I mean, to be honest, that's what I like about Catholicism. But
same. 100%.
That's the best part of Catholicism, but like
right?
Catholicism at its best. But because it's like so erotic and crazy, and
there's good music. I like the incense.
Yeah,
funerals are kind of fun in a weird way.
So I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying that's so odd because there's like something so intensely cannibalistic and erotic about Catholicism that like, you're going to take people. But anyways, that's a side note. I think,
and I mean, that was the ruse. It was really for slave labor.
Right. But I'm wondering, did he like do you have a sense of, did he like entirely like make that up, or did he misunderstand something, or like where did that come from?
There were like, no, I don't want to say pottery because I don't think that word applies here, but like bowls and shit made out of like bone fragments.
Okay.
That they just assumed were human bones, or they'd see something cooking that they assumed was a human, and it most likely wasn't. There's no like definitive evidence of ritual cannibalism really like in any research. I'm trying to remember the name of the book that, because I haven't like thought about this shit in like years now. God, I can't remember what it's called, but I mean most histories of cannibalism are based on accusations, right? And like you can't have an archive of cannibalism because like by definition you're eating the remains. Like, so yeah, you really can't prove it. And even if you do prove that they're using bones for rituals, whether it's like a morning ritual or like spiritual whatever, like that's not necessarily like eating.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he like 99.9 repeating percent just totally made it up.
Yeah. So did that work as a trafficking effort?
I mean, that was how the transatlantic slave trade started.
Yeah. That's like, I mean, I intense trafficking, but I was like wondering if like that actual like argument is something that like spurred that on.
Oh, it absolutely, like, I mean, and then this spread to like the colonization of what became the United States. And, I mean, fucking, okay, this is a side note. So my one dissertation committee member, the one who freaked out when she found out I was a dom and like outed me to the entire department, she was a Shakespeare. I wonder if she's listening to this too. Hi, Hannah. She's a Shakespeare scholar, and she had started doing research into like early American colonization, and was trying to link Shakespeare's The Tempest to the Jamestown settlement in Virginia.
Okay.
Where there was cannibalism between colonizers because they didn't know how to care for the land, so they were starving. And she was doing research into like depictions of Pocahontas.
Mm-hmm.
So my dissertation defense comes along. I'm like nervous as shit because, it's like 7 years of torture and hopefully I get to like leave at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And not all my committee members knew each other. And I had one member who was in the history department. So Hannah, I introduced the two of them and I'm like, oh, okay, like, the historian, she worked on like early Native American consumer culture.
Okay.
And Hannah goes up to her and goes, hi, do you research Pocahontas?
Okay.
And I'm like, this is so racist. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Like, the only thing to talk about.
What the fuck? And then, so the historian and I ended up becoming Twitter mutuals like a few years later. And she was like, was I on the committee? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, what's your name? And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you, but what I am going to tell you is that one of my committee members asked you about Pocahontas. And she was like, oh God, I wish I could forget that. Like, it haunts me. Anywho, I mean, even like in the fucking Disney movie, they're singing about savages, barely even human.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that is absolutely, was a civilizing mission.
Yeah. 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 So, I mean, what were some of the, like, what did you argue in your dissertation?
I think I argued that cannibalism and its relationship in the Americas to capitalism is what is like a leading theme in American culture, wherein like you have to really like you're expected to sacrifice your body to be like a good American, whether that's like I think I are like the point at which you're absolutely most American is when you're like dying on a factory floor.
Yeah. That seems so right to me.
Right. I think so too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really interesting. I never would have like connected that to cannibalism or like this notion of cannibalism, but there's something like so deep in American like psyche and culture and capitalism about like, if you're not absolutely like killing yourself or like, then you're not doing anything.
Yeah, get a real job, et cetera, et cetera. Or like I had the idea for my dissertation. I remember one day I was walking to class in college. I was really fucking hungry and I didn't have any money. And I like, it felt like my stomach was like eating itself and I didn't have any money. So I couldn't fucking do anything about it. And like that particular like quotidian violence of capitalism is like, and that constant fear that is what like, that you're gonna die unless you participate in this.
Yeah.
Like that's like, I mean, we're sex workers.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's something I mean, this is one of the things that I felt so strongly when I became a sex worker was that in all of the work environments and social environments and communities that I've been in, it feels like, and I always say that like, I mean, I think this is just patently true that like sex work is a total working class job and people don't get into it unless they have like working class roots. And
like
people are like,
sex workers are the bourgeoisie. Like,
yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
they own the means of production.
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't end up in this work unless like there's a lot of factors that lead you into this kind of work. And I'm not saying that like there's no choice in it or anything like that. I'm just saying that like as a collective, it's a working class job.
Yeah.
And there is a very working class consciousness to it and an anti-capitalist consciousness that seems like really important to me that I think isn't necessarily clear to people who are outside of it. Or
I blame the FinDoms.
Yeah, I mean,
I hate the FinDoms. I just had to get that in there. I gotta hate.
My world, the like high end escorts who are like, I don't know. Somebody tweeted the other day, and I'm not a call out sort of person, but somebody tweeted about how embarrassing it was when $12,000 fell out of their like wall.
Oh my God, yes.
Restaurant. Did you see that? And I was like, what?
Like
talking about?
Yes. Fucking ridiculous. Like, did they know? Like,
what? Why are you carrying $12,000 in cash in your wallet to the restaurant? And like, what is happening? I'm like, this isn't real.
It didn't make any sense. You're just trying to brag about how much money you make.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that there's a way that like our relationship to labor like makes us like very, very aware, and in a way that I think our clients willfully look past too. Like I think that our clients don't want to admit that we're in totally different class positions, and act like because maybe at some point if we're like successful in our career we make like a fair amount of money. Some people do at some point after like a lot of not doing that. And that's what people don't see. But I think that there's like there's a way, and I'm trying to figure out how to say this, but there's a way in which that gets obfuscated. And I think that that's important to recognize. And yeah.
Was I going to? This makes me think. I just had a client like a week ago who said something like, I'm so enchanted by your higher education. You're not like the other girls here. And I'm like, I'm not even the only dom in this dungeon right now who has a PhD. Like, fuck you. Am I really supposed to take that as a compliment? Like, wow, you're not a dumb whore like the rest of the hookers in the back. Like, what?
You know. Yeah.
Like, either way, clearly I'm not like raking in the dough as an academic, which is why I'm fucking here. Like, letting you give me a foot massage. Like,
yeah. I mean, part of that is like, part of that feels to me like, I mean, I get that too. I don't have a PhD, but I have 2 master's degrees. I did 4 years PhD. I taught at many universities. I tried to have this entire career before getting into sex work of like, I was going to be an academic. And then I was like, no, I'm not going to be an academic. And you know why I'm not going to be an academic? Because I'm not an independently wealthy person. I don't have a safety net. I am a mother. I can't like go take any like job in some like nowhere nowhere. Yeah. I can't do this. I can't do it. Like I can't do it because I don't have the resources to do it.
I mean, really the only reason I finished is out of spite. I was like, I am not going to let that dissertation win. Like I had to do it.
Long time too. And I was going to make that, like that's where I was. And I was like, I'm not going to let them drive me out of here. And then all of a sudden I was like, but I'm killing myself. Going back to the capitalist thing, like, but am I like going to sacrifice myself to this? Like, why am I doing that? Like,
I mean, I was in my 20s too, so it's easier to like abuse yourself to like get shit done.
Yeah, and I think that there's that's so like wrapped up in like this capitalist like ethos too, and this like idea that like you can just like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which you like absolutely like can't.
Like, no, not at all. You know what? I'm like, so I use my PhD as like a marketing tool.
Yeah.
For like douchebags like this guy, and then when it works, I get mad.
I hear that. Yeah.
Like, damn it, can't win.
That's so interesting. Yeah. But I mean, I think that there's a way that like part of our job is also to like, is in a sense to like obfuscate all of that. And the class drag. Yeah, class drag, I think is an important way to say that. To make all those interactions like as smooth as possible. So where people don't have to like reflect on what the power dynamic like really is.
Right. So, and yeah, like the way that if they think that you're wealthy, they'll give you more money than they would if they thought you needed it is like, I think the best example of,
and that's so
of that, attempt to obfuscate the power dynamic.
Right. So when you were a grad student, when you were going through all that, were you working in the dungeon then?
I wasn't, because there wasn't a commercial dungeon I went to UT Austin. There wasn't a commercial dungeon in Austin. So I did some sugaring, always on the side of, on like dominant sugar. I don't want to say it wasn't like, kinky GFE kind of shit. It was, I did some, and then I quit I had this one violent client and I was like, you know what, fuck this. I'm done. And like, I was never particularly shy about it. Like, I didn't fucking care. Like, and other grad students would come to me and like ask my advice on if they should like start sex work and like how to do it.
Yeah.
And I'd usually be like, don't, like, you have a dad.
Yeah.
Go.
That's my advice. I have so many people reach out to me that they're like, I just want, like, I was at a social event the other day and I got kind of miffed because somebody came up to me and she was like, yeah, I'd really love to talk to you because like, I'm pretty and I shouldn't have to like, go out with people for, and I was like, is that what you think that sex workers are doing? Just like being pretty and being paid for that? Like, that's not what the job is. If you have another job that you could do that.
Or try Findom. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, there's so much that can be like said about that. Do you feel like the work that you did in your dissertation like gives you a lens to like view the labor that you do now?
Not so much as it gives me a lens to view how people view us. Like, it's just like complete like leeches.
So yeah, say more about that.
Well, you know, when my dissertation committee member found out I was a dom, she withdrew all my letters of rec. I remember at the time, because like I couldn't apply for tenure track jobs anymore. You need 3 letters. She was number 3. I ended up getting a replacement, but trying to explain to her, like, listen, I won't be able to eat. Like, I can't pay my rent. That's why I'm like, you're now like cutting off an avenue to which I could stop doing this work.
Yeah.
Because something about it has changed your perception of me as like someone who doesn't need resources to physically function.
Yeah.
Like that, and that's not how anything. That's not how this works.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I remember asking her, I was like, you know, I'm not trying to be like fresh, but like, have you ever not been able to pay your rent? And, you know, the day comes, you need to pay it and you don't have the money. And she was like, no, I never have. Like, like you would she understood that I was broke
and had to drive a car and had to look for change to put gas in the car because you don't have any money to put gas in your car, like, or you don't have a car and you can't get to the place that you need to do something, like,
right,
until you're looking for change to survive, like you don't know what.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, she understood that I was broke when I was a grad student. And, you know, like, she paid for my flight back to Austin to defend my dissertation. Because she knew I couldn't afford it. But something about selling sex just kind of undid that.
Yeah.
Like, basic human functioning.
Right. I think that there's like a way in which like there's a ick factor that some people who have hang-ups around sex and sexuality like just can't get over.
Yeah, you know, I wonder. So I was like, how can I make whorephobia work for me? So I was like, don't worry, I'm not an escort. I'm a dom. The only shoes I take, or the only clothes I take off are my shoes. And like, that didn't help my case for some reason. Probably because whorephobia doesn't help anyone except for people like that bitch. But yeah, no, I do wonder too, people who don't know what like BDSM is, really like they I feel like the popular imagination around BDSM is just like a troop of psychopaths.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Are you
in a way that's like evil?
Yeah.
For people who believe in that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Do you know, it's interesting that you say that you say that you've like employed whorephobia like that. One of the things that like I've talked about on this show before is like I've read recently a fair number of memoirs written by dominatrices, and
I've been reading a lot lately too.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Which ones have you read?
Have you read Brutalities?
I read Brutalities.
Oh, I am exquisite.
Her writing,
I mean, obvious,
so good.
It is so good.
Yeah.
Like, and then I found out that we have like a bunch of mutual friends, and I'm like, I I love doming. What is the one that I have that I'm reading right now is Pretty Baby by Chris Belcher.
Yeah, that was a good one too. She's also not, yeah.
Yeah, I ran into her randomly at Dyke Day in LA.
Okay.
Earlier this year.
Yeah.
Someone asked like my job and I said like dominatrix, and then I heard someone say like, no, she's a dominatrix, and it ended up being her. We're like, no, there are two of us.
Yeah. I read have you read Whip Smart?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Whip Smart was one of them that I had like issues with. And the reason sorry, go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say about it.
So she and I also have a lot of mutual friends, and everyone who knew her in the New York City BDSM community was pretty irked by that book.
Yeah, I can. Well, and this is what I wanted to bring up about it. One of the things that was like very clear in that book was that line exactly. Like, I'm not like those other horrors. I'm
smart. I lead a double life. She was only a dom too for like 4 years.
Yeah. 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 So I'm curious, like, how you felt about using that and how it was received or like not received. Because for me, as a whore that does take my clothes off, like that always is
like respect. I mean, I do sometimes like when I have to pee on someone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I think that it's very hard for me to hear that, because I hear that so much coming out of the like dom community, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, so what's interesting to me about that, intra community whorephobia is, so like doms for quite a while worked really hard to not have to have sex with clients, and to make it like purely BDSM, no like vanilla sex at all. Like that, like people worked really hard to make that happen, and like faced consequences for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that somehow went from like, we're practicing BDSM, like that's what we want to do. We don't want to be forced to do things that we don't want to do, into like this weird judgment call.
Yeah.
And which like I haven't seen as much lately. I've seen it go back the other way, maybe the past, probably since the pandemic, where a lot of doms who will like, they'll say on their website, like, I don't take off my clothes, I don't have any sex. If you ask for these things, the session is over. But then on their ads, they offer full service.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm like, like, either you are or you are not. Like, can we stop being weird about this?
I see porn stars do that too. I have interviewed porn stars on my on Peep Show, and they were like, "Oh, well, I don't do any escorting." And then I open up Tris, and I'm like, "But yeah, you do."
Yeah, like why just?
But I often read that as, and this is like the most generous reading possible, and I think it actually probably is true of a lot of people. I mean, there's a legality here, and
yes.
And I totally understand why people would be like, I don't do that. Wink, wink, because you don't want to be like on the record saying that you do something that's criminalized. And I understand that. Like, that totally makes sense to me. One of the things that Chris Belcher did in her book, Pretty Baby, that I really appreciated was kind of undermining the fact that like, what that argument hinges on is very like heteronormative frameworks, right? So like, not having sex because it's not PIV. And Chris like actually says really explicitly like, okay, so what's the difference between like a penis penetrating like my vagina or my entire fist penetrating my client's like asshole, right? Are we not sex, but like, like it depends on like who's receiving and what that doesn't make any sense. Like, bullshit. When We're Not Hustling is brought to you by Assembly 4. Assembly 4 is a collective of sex workers and technologists working to bring the overall cost of sex work down through their advertising platform, Tryst.link. They also educate clients through the Good Client Guide and provide resources and articles written by and for sex workers. Assembly 4 caters to all genders and demographics and raises funds to fight for sex worker rights and against exploitation in the sex industry. Learn more at assembly4.com. ASSEMBLYFOUR.com. Thank you for listening to When We're Not Hustling. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Doing so will help other people find us. And if you're a sex worker who wants to come on the show and talk about your life outside of work, we would love to have you. Please send an email with more information to nothustlingpod@proton.me.
Yeah. Well, and I get that, I still work in a house because I'm too fucking tired to do my own advertising. At one house where I worked, which is also where what's her face, Whipsmart, where she worked. Yes, yeah. Jasmine's. If you were a new dom, you were not maybe 30 days. You weren't allowed. At least when I was there, you weren't allowed to see new clients at all. And then once you got past that, you weren't allowed to admit to certain acts that would be illegal, like fisting you couldn't admit to, pegging you couldn't admit to, sounding, showers, whatever, until it was an established client that you knew you could trust and wasn't law enforcement. So on one hand, I'm I'm trying to get my stream of thought. It hop the tracks. I feel like that might be considered not sex from a client's perspective, but I mean, any type of penetration is legally going to be considered. So, I mean, in most states.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's an important point because there is no federal definition of
right.
It's all by specific jurisdictions. And so I think that it gets all very murky and very complicated very fast.
Well, arguably my putting my feet in someone's mouth is penetration.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's just not the penetration that we think of. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But one thing that I've seen lately is Doms being weird about other Doms who don't do full service or don't take off their clothes. And I'll oh, you think you're better than that?
Yeah.
Kind of way. And no, it's just not the thing I do.
Right. And I
just do a different thing.
I've been thinking a lot about this recently as somebody who's done a lot of different types of sex work. I as somebody who started in camming, went into phone sex, did clip production, has done some low-key BDSM stuff, and is mostly a vanilla full service, GFE sort of provider. I've never done stripping, but that's probably the only thing that I've never engaged, and I've never worked in an establishment like what you've done. So, I think, but the reason that I bring this up is that I've been doing a lot of thinking about the sex work umbrella, and there's a way that politically it's important, but they're not all the same job. No. And when we start collapsing them into each other and then trying to police what people are and are not doing, I think that we lose a lot.
Right.
And it's very complex. Yeah.
Well, I remember before the pandemic, if I said I was a sex worker, everyone assumed I was full service. And then once the pandemic hit, I get, my haters are you just show your holes on OnlyFans. And I'm no, I literally don't.
I don't either.
Good for them, I guess. But it's, I was bitching to my therapist about this recently, I was bitching about the word queer, which was a political term.
Yeah.
Yeah, that people would identify with to establish solidarity. Right. And has now become some weird in this kind of I don't want to say oppression, it's a clout economy.
Yeah.
Where a bunch of people who actually don't see anywhere near eye to eye on anything, least of all sexuality, are put into the same I feel sex work is a really similar, we've kind of lost the plot here.
Right. Yeah.
Or those, when people are Findom is valid. Camming is I mean, on one hand, yes, but on the other, who gives a shit if it's valid? Decrim, shut up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just the reason I've been thinking about this is that I feel like, the first time I thought about this was very, very early in the Peep Show days. So maybe 2017 or something, where I had like a stripper on who was talking about the fact that like the same exact issue that you're talking about, extras in the club, like who's doing extras in the club and who's not doing extras in the club and blah, 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 blah. And what she was saying is like, actually, the problem with like the secrecy around that is that there are a lot of people who like for obviously legitimate reasons don't want to provide those services, but
Right.
and that should be like allowed. But when there's but when you move from like I'm a person who doesn't want to do that to nobody should be doing that
Yeah.
because that's not what strippers do and blah 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 blah, that it like becomes yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like the right way to talk about
Well,
this.
like I get the argument for surrounding extras as far as like raids go. You don't want to get raided.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and doing extras in a dungeon or in a strip club, wherever, with someone that you do not know 100% is not law enforcement or connected to law enforcement, you risk the whole house getting shut down.
right, yeah.
Like, go to a second location. Come on.
Yeah.
Or I had a tweet maybe like a year ago where I said something like, if you're a dom and you're working at a commercial dungeon, then don't take nudes at the dungeon. Like, we don't want to get raided. We just don't want to get raided. And a lot of organizers were upset with me for like not centering the most marginalized in that scenario, the most marginalized being people who feel economically coerced into doing extras or nudity or whatever the fuck. And I'm like, first of all, why are we assuming that like most marginalized equals full service? Like that there's already, I mean, obviously full service is the most stigmatized and criminalized, but that's, why are we buying into that?
Right.
But also like, why would we be throwing each other under the bus in the name of the most marginal? Like, what is this like rhetorical like game we're playing here? Like, we're going to put everyone at risk and make everyone more marginalized so that we're politically correct?
Yeah.
Like,
right. No, I understand.
No.
Like when we talk about solidarity and solidarity with like the most marginalized, we also need to think about solidarity. Like, I think what you're saying is like, we need to think about solidarity too. And like, how do we protect each other? Not just the most marginalized and let's make like a hierarchy of like the most marginalized, marginalized, but rather like, how do we improve the conditions for all of us? And it's totally possible to hold the line of like, hey, let's not take nudes inside the dungeon because we want to keep everybody there safe, without saying, and nobody who works in the dungeon should be offering full service. Like, those aren't the same arguments.
Exactly. Right. It's just like, don't put this on the internet where police might see it and then we'll raid the dungeons exactly like they did 15 years ago.
Right.
Like, which I guess you'd have to remember, but
yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, I think this is like, this is why I've been thinking about this like sex work umbrella, or this like notion of a sex work umbrella that like actually like collapses a lot of things that don't, like, when we talk about things in terms of, I mean, and this is fairly theoretical, I think, but when we talk about things in terms of like the hierarchy, assuming that, and this is the point that I think you're making, assuming that like full service, like everyone who's doing full service is like the most marginalized, like that's obviously not true. Like, there are high-end escorts who are making huge amounts of money that are way less marginalized than, like, say, an OnlyFans creator who is seeking mutual aid because they can't pay their bills. And, like, I think, and it's not just economic, it's also like social and of those things. So I think that like, but it's, what I'm trying to say is that like, it doesn't actually make sense to impose some sort of order that that then gets like applied.
Yeah, it's, well, and then like, well, PayPal is going to see you as a sex worker even if you sell feet pics. Like, okay, why are we operating under PayPal's rules? Like, fuck PayPal.
What? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I'm like hesitating here, and only because I think that like I can see like all sides. I can see like the implications of all of that at once, like we don't want to create all of these artificial like separations and gatekeeping and say like, well, these are like legitimate sex workers or these are more marginalized sex workers and least marginalized sex workers. These are legitimate jobs and like dirty jobs or whatever. Like we don't create all of these like separations, but at the same time, like the concerns of somebody who's selling feet pics and the concerns of somebody who's working in a dungeon and the concerns of somebody who is doing street-based work aren't the same.
Right. And we shouldn't pretend that they are, but also not privilege one over the other. I don't know. Yeah, this is one of those things that I'm like very careful not to bring up on Twitter, or else like I swear someone will like show up at my apartment and shoot me. Like people get so bent out of shape.
Right. And that's why I think maybe it's important to like think through and like clearly about like what that looks like. And I think that the way that you said it is right, which is that like we shouldn't pretend that they're all the same, but we also shouldn't believe that like we shouldn't hierarchicalize them or assume anything about the value of one kind of work over another kind of work.
Well, like I'd say similarly, like in the queer, the LGBTQIA plus community, that like my concerns as a cis bisexual woman are not the concerns of like a non-binary asexual person. Well, I mean, like there is some overlap, but like not a ton.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I don't know. This came far afield from like your dissertation, but I do.
It really did. Yeah. Well, I mean, I talked in that too about like class and like what working class means in America. Where like everyone thinks they're working class if they have a job. Everyone thinks that. Like lawyers making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year self-identify as working class
because
for some reason. Yeah. And like, no working, I mean, sure, that's the case in fucking England, but we're not in England.
Yeah, right.
Like, yeah, like that's not what that means. Working class like evokes a very specific idea of someone working shitty hourly wage jobs that they have to work for the money.
Yeah.
Not a lawyer or a physician, like regardless of like it's about the labor and not the like revenue, I guess.
Yeah.
Would you fit, and people confuse the two a lot. Say what?
How would you fit sex work into that?
Well, sex work I would say is like certainly working class and manual labor. I mean, the stigma around sex work alone, I think, aside from the like occasional trust fund weirdo, who's like, I wanted to, like, okay. Aside from that, like people don't go into sex work. I mean, people don't typically begin sex work because they want to be a sex worker, and people don't typically begin working as a janitor because they want to be a janitor. That said, being a janitor was one of the best jobs of my life. No one talked to me. I got to listen to my own music. No one bugged me. But that is neither here nor there. It's a job and not a career.
Yeah. Although,
and that's, I think, another. I mean, there are career sex workers.
I would kind of push back against that because I think that that's mostly true, and there's a lot of like in and out of sex work, but also like I actually at this point do consider myself a career sex worker. This is my entire thing. This is what I do. I've been in it 10 years. This is how I make all of my money. I don't depend on doing something else.
I'd say it's perceived as a job and not as a career versus something like law or medicine or academia, which is hilarious because academia is in most cases a job and and not a career at all. Like 75% of academics are adjuncts or professors are adjuncts.
Yeah. So even as like at this point in my life, like a career, I still think it's a working class job.
No, for sure. Well, and I think that what's weird, people want others to perceive them as having pulled themselves up by the bootstraps. So someone who is working like a lucrative job might identify as working class for some kind of social clout.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas someone who is working a legit working class job might not identify as such for social clout because like poverty is highly stigmatized. But there's still this like level of wanting to be perceived as like working hard
Yeah.
or struggling for some reason.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you can't just enjoy what, like, I don't know.
Yeah. I actually like my work most of the time.
I do too. Like, I don't like need to be in the dungeon anymore. Like, I'm there because I like it. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's also hilarious. It's like Looney Tunes shit. You get to dress up in funny outfits and beat people with sticks. Like, that's great.
I just feel like it suits my personality really well. Like, I like about like, what are your secrets? What do you want? Like, what do you not tell other people? Like,
right?
Not out. Like, it all feels so rich to me, but that doesn't mean that like but I'm still very aware of what it is. Like, but
right.
I can
or
still
like
be like, you can get a lot of joy out of this. There's a lot of importance. People get their needs met in a way that they don't in other places.
Right.
Find that to be very like important. All the other things are still true.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, I love like sitting with the other doms in the break room and talking shit. I love talking shit. Especially when I was still teaching, like the difference between sitting in the teacher's lounge and listening to these assholes whine about email etiquette and like sitting in the break room and like talking about like actual like things. I mean, really was such like a it's a really like stark image portrayal of like how heavily stigmatized sex workers are, even like to me, another sex worker, that I'm like, wow, these doms are a lot smarter than this lady who got a master's degree in English in 1964 and still teaches for some reason.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, why did I have that assumption in the first place?
Right. Yeah. So what, I was like, we want to wrap this up, and I was like trying to think of a good way to wrap this up, because this has been like a very wandering like conversation to things that actually we're not supposed to talk about.
Yeah, we're supposed to talk specifically about not doing sex work, right?
That too. I mean, two things about it, because we're not supposed to be talking about things that aren't sex work, but also we're not supposed to talk about it because like within sex work activism, like this is all very contentious. Like all of these like attitudes about like sex work are very, very contentious. So I'm like, okay, so how do we then like pull ourselves out of like
out of our impending cancellations?
Yeah. But I guess the way like here's I guess what I would say about that is about our impending cancellations is that I feel like in terms of like not hustling of what we're doing when we're not working, I think that there's part of the reason that it's hard to do that and hard to talk about what we're doing when we're not working is because like everything that like all of the ways that we understand our own experiences and talk about our experiences are so heavily politicized that it's like hard to get out of that. And I think like something important about stating that.
Or like even with my dissertation, that I thought like I very intentionally did not discuss gender or sexuality at all because I didn't want to out myself. And then the fucking things about dehumanization of the laboring body, like really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like when we're not hustling, we still, everything that we're doing is still in one way or another informed by it.
Right. Yeah. And
like that's how we function in the world, regardless of if we're on the clock or not.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's a really remarkable thing that I think pulls us apart from people who like if you are a legitimate accountant, not a TikTok accountant.
Dude, that first like I just say I'm an accountant video that went viral a few years ago, that kid went to my high school.
Oh gosh, really?
Yeah, and I was like, oh my god, he finally came out. Yes. Like, good for you, man.
I think that I feel like if you were a real accountant, not a TikTok accountant, then you could like easily get on a show and say, what do I do when I'm not being an accountant? Well, I play ball with my kids and I do like X, Y, and Z. And I think that it's our lives are so heavily politicized that I think it's like very difficult for us to.
Well, and even the shit that we do and like reading memoirs by dominatrices, like my mom was a nurse. She wasn't reading memoirs by nurses. She was reading crime novels and shit, like, and Moby Dick.
Yeah. So all of that's really interesting. So,
well, and I think too that like our jobs are also like an identity category in ways that others are. So like, you know, like if you're queer and not sex working, then you're going to be consuming a lot of queer media because that's just what you relate to as a person. And that has nothing to do with your job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But but it does have everything to do with who you are. And I think,
right.
You know, and this is now I'm going to dive into like just for a second, and then we're going to like cut, and then we're going to cut to the end. But like heavily like contentious thing, which is that like there is a way that I feel like sex work itself should be considered a queer identity. And
for sure. I agree 100%.
And, you know, going off of like, I'm, oh my gosh, I'm going to totally.
I mean, it's non-normative and criminalized sexuality.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
BDS, I think like being kinky too. And like, you know, these things can still get used against us in court. Like up until I think 2015, sadomasochism was still in the DSM. And if you were kinky, then it could be used to deprive you of custody.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that sex work should be added to Pride, to
right.
LGBTQIA. I don't know why sex work isn't like in there somewhere. I think
also like the number of cis straight sex workers I know is like 3.
Yeah. Neurotypical ones. Like, I don't think I know any like neurotypical cis straight people working in the sex industry. Because it's just not something like it's not normative, and normally don't do this.
No, yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's what pisses me off about the like marriage is sex work crowd. Like, it's not actually. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
That's no.
Me off about like. I take a lot of offense to people who are like, we're all whores under capitalism. And I'm like, no, you're not. You are not. You have a job.
No.
That's not
why do you like yeah, like you could tell people your job when you meet them and not have to worry that they're going to be weird.
People try to use that to they think that they're like destigmatizing sex work by saying that, but I'm like, no, you just don't understand what sex work is when you say that, because like you're not.
Yeah.
You're not a whore. I'm sorry. You have a job.
Yeah. And I mean, like, even the only times I've felt bad about being a sex worker or doing sex work have been when I've had to deal with like normie fucknuts who are giving me shit about it. Mm-hmm. Like the actual work I really enjoy. And you can't say the same about accounting.
Yeah.
Who enjoys accounting?
You have to have a certain kind of I don't have.
Yeah.
Some people who really like spreadsheets.
I really like math. Not spreadsheets specifically, but like, God, I love math. Like, it's fun.
I like to order things. People who like to order things are like,
yeah,
these people like being accountants. I'm not going to write off accounting as like, but
sure. Or like, I organized all the sounds at work a few weeks ago, and the managers were like, like, how? I'm like, well, some of them look different, and then they go in ascending. Oh, okay.
All right. So I like to end all the. So what are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? Pretty Baby.
Oh, good. Yeah, you're in the middle of
it.
And
yeah.
Listening to like books or podcasts or music.
Chapel Roan. I'm listening to Chapel Roan on repeat. I can't stop. I've been fully sucked in. I make no apologies. I love Chapel Roan.
PJ, my PJ, funny. My TJ. My TJ loves Chaperone.
I'm obsessed with and like weirdly protective of her. Like I feel like I'm her mom or something. Like I'm not even old enough to be her mom, but like I'm like I must protect her at all costs.
I don't get it, but I think I tend to not get it. But yeah, anyways. And what are you excited about?
I mean, so I'm working on my book proposal and I am really excited to get that fucking thing finished and submitted and under contract.
You want to write?
On sex work and tech.
Okay, nice.
Like the shit that I've been researching mainly. I have it outlined. I just need to like, why is writing a book proposal so hard?
It's very hard. Yeah.
Like, it's like writing the dissertation prospectus was 10 times harder than actually writing the dissertation.
Well, because the framework for it. So you have to come up with like an entire framework before you even.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just like, I'm so excited to just get that off of my back.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Which is not a particularly exciting answer.
No, it is. What are you, where can people find you?
Twitter, or X.
Yeah.
Then doctrixsnow.com. And also at Pandora's Box on Wednesday through Saturday.
In New York?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of When We're Not Hustling. I'm your host, Jessie Sage. You can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or visit my website at jessiesage.com. The show was produced by Emily Foster and the music is by Benjamin J. Beninati. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at NotHustlingPod. To support the show and get sneak peeks, please go to patreon.com/sapiotextual. For more information about our show and what we do here, please visit our website at nothustling.com. Signing off. Have a great week.